body was on the kitchen floor, nude.
I am concerned, everybody else is too.
Phantom killer.
Frankford Slasher.
The pattern is the same.
Blood on the tracks. They thought she was just another transient, until they saw the knife wounds. 47 of them. August 19th, 1985. A maintenance worker for SEPTA stumbled upon a body near the Frankfurt elevated train tracks. In Philadelphia, the woman was partially clothed, her shirt pulled up, her lower half exposed. Blood had pooled around her chest, soaking into the dirt. She'd been stabbed dozens of times, not in a frenzy, but in deliberate, controlled strikes. Her name was Helen Patton. She was 52 years old. That part the media mentioned. What they didn't say was this: Helen was a known face in the neighborhood bars. Quiet, solitary, often sipping beers alone. A woman who had, over time, learned how to disappear in plain sight. No one knew where she lived exactly. No one saw who she left with that night. But someone did, and they took her life, methodically. The beginning of a pattern. When homicide detectives arrived, there was no sign of robbery. Helen's belongings were untouched. Her earrings were still on. Her pocket still held change. No defensive wounds. No witnesses. Just 47 stab wounds, and a position of the body that would become a calling card. What the police didn't say at first was this: the way her arms were placed. The exposure of her body. It felt staged, as if the killer wanted her found, wanted her to be seen like this. Powerless, displayed. Still, in the heat of August 1985, this seemed like a one-off tragedy. A horrific murder. Yes, but not the work of a serial predator. Until it happened again. 3 months later, January 3rd, 1986, a woman named Anna Carroll, 68, was found stabbed to death in her apartment on Orthodox Street, just blocks away from where Helen's body had been discovered. Anna had lived in the neighborhood her whole life. A devout Catholic, she went to Mass twice a week. Her apartment was locked from the inside, and yet the killer had gotten in. Just like Helen, Anna was stabbed repeatedly. Her clothing was disturbed. Nothing was stolen. It was becoming clear. This wasn't random. It was ritual. The media sleeps, but the killer doesn't. There was no panic yet. No newspaper headlines screaming slasher. The police were cautious. Local reporters were focused on drug arrests and political scandals. But the killer wasn't waiting. Over the next 12 months, the body count rose. Slowly, quietly, but always in the same grim rhythm. Susanna Olschiff, 64. Found dead on Christmas Day 1986. Jean Durkin, 28, killed in 1987. Her body left under a truck. Catherine M. Jones, 29, murdered not far from the others. Every victim was female. Most were older. Many were seen leaving bars before they vanished. All were white. All were found stabbed multiple times. And in nearly every case, someone had seen them with a man shortly before their deaths. A white male, mid-40s, heavy-set, quiet. No one knew his name. Yet, the city finally wakes up. By the time Margaret Vaughn was murdered in November 1988, police began to admit what some detectives had feared since Helen Patton. They were hunting a serial killer, one who was stalking women, learning their routines, earning their trust, and striking only when no one else was watching. Philadelphia's Frankfurt neighborhood transformed overnight. Women refused to walk alone after dark. Bars lost business. Residents whispered about the man who struck like a ghost, then vanished before anyone even realized something was wrong. But still, no suspect, no arrest, no fingerprints, no forced entry, just blood and silence. Until he made one mistake. In the next part, we'll meet the man police thought was the killer. a man whose life unraveled under suspicion, and whose arrest seemed like the end of the nightmare. But it wasn't. It was only the middle. The man behind the glass. The murders were brutal, but the silence after each one was worse. By early 1989, the Philadelphia Police Department had quietly assembled a task force. Behind closed doors, they admitted the truth. They were tracking a serial killer, now dubbed by local journalists as the Frankford Slasher. The body count had reached 7. All white women, all stabbed repeatedly, all found with their clothing disturbed, their bodies arranged. But the victims weren't the only ones being watched. His name was Leonard Christopher, 34 years old, soft-spoken, a seafood processing worker who lived and worked in Frankfurt. He didn't drive. He didn't own a gun. He had no history of violence. But he was about to become the centerpiece of a city's desperation for justice. The 8th victim. On April 29, 1990, Carol Dowd, 46 years old, was found dead in an alleyway. She had been drinking at the same bar where several earlier victims had last been seen. She was stabbed repeatedly, but this time, there was a witness. Multiple people claimed to have seen Carol with a man shortly before her death. And that man, they said, was Leonard Christopher. Police brought him in. He was nervous, cooperative, confused. He admitted to knowing Carol, said he'd walked her part of the way home that night, but he swore he never went into the alley. He didn't kill her. Still, there were no other suspects. No other leads, just a poor, quiet man who had walked a woman home, and the city demanding answers. A convenient arrest. On May 5th, 1990, Leonard Christopher was arrested for the murder of Carol Dowd. Detectives found no weapon, no bloodied clothes, no fingerprints, but he couldn't provide a strong alibi, and he admitted to being near the scene. That was enough. The city exhaled. The slasher had a face. The bars reopened. The fear subsided. News anchors ran the story as if it were a done deal. But there was a problem, a massive problem. Carol Dowd was killed in April 1990, but 8 other women had been murdered between 1985 and 1989, and Leonard Christopher had no connection to any of them. No evidence. No sightings. Nothing. And then came the fatal twist. Another woman was murdered, while Leonard was already behind bars. The timeline breaks. On September 6th, 1990, Michelle Denner, 30, was found stabbed to death. She was last seen with a white male in his 40s. Not Leonard. Michelle's murder fit the exact pattern of the previous slasher killings. Stabbed multiple times. No signs of robbery. Body positioned deliberately. But by then, the case against Leonard was already moving forward. The police made a decision. They would not link Michelle's death to the Frankford Slasher case. They said it was unrelated. They said it didn't fit the profile. But the truth was clear to anyone paying attention. The real Frankford Slasher was still out there. The trial. Leonard Christopher went to trial for the murder of Carol Dowd in early 1991. The prosecution had no forensic evidence, no confession, no motive, but they had witnesses who placed him near Carol. They painted him as awkward, obsessive, even unstable. The defense argued there was no physical evidence. The jury didn't care. Guilty. Leonard was sentenced to life in prison. The city closed the case, and the media turned away. But one detective never forgot. A voice in the void. You can lock up a man, but can you imprison the truth? After Leonard Christopher was convicted in 1991 for the murder of Carol Dowd, the case of the Frankford Slasher was officially closed. The mayor called it a win for law enforcement. The press hailed it as a breakthrough. The community exhaled. But behind the scenes, One man knew it didn't add up. Detective Ron McLeod had been part of the task force in the early days. He saw the crime scene photos. All of them. Helen Patton, Anna Carroll, Margaret Vaughn, Susanna Olshoff, the way their bodies were posed. The precision of the wounds. The eerily similar staging. Carol Dowd's murder had fit that mold. Yes, but Leonard didn't fit any of it. The pattern was too refined, too experienced, too cold. Leonard was a loner, an introvert, not a manipulator, not a planner. And most importantly, he had no connection to the earlier victims. No sightings, no bar tabs, no shared locations. And then there was Michelle Denner, the killing that changed everything. Michelle was 30, younger than most previous victims, known to have struggled with mental health. She often wandered the Frankfurt area. On the night of September 6th, 1990, she was seen walking with a white male, described as heavy-set, balding, in his 40s. Not Leonard. And Leonard, he was already in custody when Michelle was murdered. That fact should have blown the case wide open. It didn't. The Philadelphia Police Department refused to connect Michelle's murder to the others. They called it an isolated incident. Detective McLeod wasn't buying it. He quietly began interviewing witnesses again, off the books. The bartenders, the bar regulars, the women who had seen the slasher and lived. And again, they described the same man. White guy, older, heavy, real polite. You wouldn't think twice about him. Leonard wasn't even close. A deeper look, McLeod pulled Leonard's work records, his schedule, his locations. He discovered that Leonard wasn't even in the Frankfurt area at the time of some of the earlier killings. He was working late shifts at the fish market, with coworkers able to verify it. One coworker even said he was scared of blood, couldn't even handle a cut on his finger without panicking. But none of it mattered. The DA had their conviction. The city had its closure. The slasher had his shadow to hide behind. And Leonard, he had a cell. The silent years. From 1991 to 2000, no further murders officially tied to the Frankford Slasher were recorded. At least not in Philadelphia. The women kept dying in nearby neighborhoods. Same pattern. Same mo. No one paid attention. No one connected the dots. And Leonard Christopher, he died of cancer behind bars in 2000. He maintained his innocence until the end. His last words to his sister were simple. They needed someone to blame. I was just close enough. A system that looked the other way. Detective McLeod submitted an internal report in 1993, requesting a formal re-examination of the Frankfurt Slasher murders. In light of Michelle Denner's death, the report was buried. He was reassigned to another precinct within months. His access to case files was revoked, and the message was clear. Let it die. But McLeod never did. He kept every file, every photo, every interview, waiting for someone, anyone, to listen. Because deep down, he believed what no one wanted to admit. The real Frankfurt Slasher got away. And worse, he might still be out there. The shadows that never leave. What if the killer was never hiding? What if we just refused to see him? Detective Ron McLeod had tried. He submitted the reports, tracked down witnesses, pulled timelines. But in the end, he was told to move on. And so, officially, he did. But unofficially, he kept digging. He knew something that few others did. The slasher didn't just vanish after 1990. He may have stopped killing in Frankfurt, but the pattern didn't end there. It was migrating. Murders in the margins. Between 1991 and 1996, a series of women were murdered in the greater Philadelphia region, including nearby parts of New Jersey and North Philly. The details weren't widely reported. The victims were transient, homeless, vulnerable. They were often found in alleys, stairwells, or abandoned buildings. Some had been stabbed multiple times. Some had their bodies arranged. One victim had even been seen entering a bar with an unidentified white male in his 40s. Balding, soft-spoken, and then never seen again. The Cloud saw the pattern. But by then, the Frankford Slasher case had been stamped, boxed, and buried. No one wanted to reopen that wound. Not after Leonard Christopher had died in prison. Not after the public had moved on. The composite they ignored. In 1990, before Michelle Denner's murder, police had quietly collected descriptions from multiple bar patrons, all of whom had seen various victims with a similar man before their deaths. A composite sketch was created, but never released to the public. The face was nondescript, average, but the eyes, cold, dead. The Cloud kept a copy in his private files. He compared it to every known photo of Leonard Christopher. There was no resemblance. None. But there was one man who had shown up in the background of the early murder scenes. George Feeney, the mystery man. George Feeney was never charged with anything. He'd worked briefly at a rehab center in Frankfurt in the early 80s. Volunteered at a few food kitchens. Quiet, no family on record, and out of shelters. He vanished in 1990, but one bar owner remembered him well. He was weird, like he was always watching people. Not in a creepy way at first, just quiet. You know. Then one of the girls went missing, and he never came back. Feeney had also been seen talking to Carol Dowd the week before her murder, and to another victim, Margaret Vaughn, in 1988. But these connections were never followed up. Why? Because the system had already picked its villain. Leonard, an envelope in the dark. In 1999, a retired crime scene photographer named Al Daniels found something in his basement. An envelope labeled Slasher Bar Witnesses. Inside were undeveloped negatives. He had them processed. Among the photos were candid shots of the crowd near one of the early crime scenes. And in one of them, grainy but visible, stood a man who matched the composite sketch. He was watching from the edge of the frame, expressionless, motionless. It wasn't Leonard. It looked like George Feeney. The photo was time-stamped, August 19, 1985, the day Helen Patton was found. The system collapses inward. The Cloud brought this photo to a journalist in 2002. They ran the story. A brief piece titled, "Frankford Slasher May Still Be Free." It was buried on page 9 of the city paper. No follow-up, no investigation. And just like that, the case faded again, swallowed by time and silence. But the story doesn't end there. Because years later, in 2013, a woman named Lisa Roman, then in her 60s, came forward after seeing a documentary rerun about the case. She said a man had stalked her back in 1989. He matched the same description. White, balding, quiet. He followed her home from a bar, knocked on her door. When she didn't answer, he whispered through the mail slot, "I know you're in there." She never saw him again, until she saw the composite sketch. And she froze. It was him, she said. I know it was. But it wasn't that man they locked up. The real slasher was never hiding. He just blended in. And we let him. The man they forgot. He never confessed. He never slipped. He just vanished. But the damage he left behind still echoed through the alleys of Frankfurt, a neighborhood now filled with silent ghosts and unanswered questions. And perhaps the most haunted ghost of all was a man still remembered only for the crime he didn't commit. Leonard Christopher died in prison in 2000. No fanfare, no justice, just a quiet death in a system that had turned its back on him long ago. But long before his death, Leonard had written letters, dozens, some to his sister, some to former attorneys, and some to no one in particular. Unsent, found years later in a prison storage unit. And one of them, he wrote, "They never wanted the truth, just someone to point it. I was in the wrong place, with the wrong skin, at the wrong time." Because Leonard was black, every witness who had seen the Frankford Slasher described a white man. Every one of the 9 known victims, white women, and yet he was the only one ever charged. How did that happen? The pressure to close. In the late 80s and early 90s, Philadelphia was under intense scrutiny. Violent crime was up. Homicide clearances were down. The mayor's office was desperate for headlines that showed police action. So when Carol Dowd was murdered in 1990, in a high-profile, particularly brutal way, the department made a decision. They would charge someone. And Leonard had the misfortune of being known to the victim. He was seen walking with her. He was awkward, isolated, poor, easy to vilify. The case against him was built on circumstantial evidence and eyewitness identifications, notoriously unreliable, especially under media pressure. There was no DNA, no murder weapon, no confession. But once the narrative took shape, nothing could undo it. Even when Michelle Denner was murdered after Leonard was in custody, in the same neighborhood, in the same signature style, police refused to connect it. They called it unrelated. They called it coincidence. They were lying. The slasher's final message. In 1991, a postcard was mailed anonymously to a local newspaper editor. It read, in block letters, "You caught the wrong man. I'm still watching. F.S." The postcard was dismissed as a hoax, a sick joke, but Detective Ron McLeod didn't think so. He was retired by then, but he kept his files, the composite sketch, the photo from the 1985 crowd, the reports that were never followed up. When he looked at that postcard, he saw something chilling. The handwriting matched entries in a rehab clinic logbook from 1984, signed by a former volunteer, George Feeney. The unfinished puzzle. George Feeney's name has never appeared in any official public record as a suspect, but several bar employees, shelter volunteers, and residents of Frankfurt in the 80s recall him clearly. A quiet man, always watching, often drinking coffee instead of beer. Polite, strange, off. The most chilling story came from a bartender in 1987. He used to ask weird questions, like, how late do women stay here? Do they walk home alone? One night he asked if anyone would hear screaming in the alley. I thought he was just drunk. Now I'm not so sure. Feeney disappeared after Leonard's arrest. Some believe he fled. Some think he died. Others, the ones who lived near Frankfurt, believe something worse. That he never left. The uncomfortable truth. The Frankford Slasher case remains officially closed. The Philadelphia Police Department has never reopened the investigation. Leonard Christopher's conviction has never been overturned. And George Feeney, as far as the record shows, he doesn't exist anymore. No death certificate, no arrest, no obituary, just a name whispered by those who still remember. And a sketch that still matches the man some women say they see. Late at night, near the old bars, standing in the shadows, waiting. We follow the aftermath, the legacy left behind, the lives destroyed, and the one place where the slasher may have revealed himself without even knowing it. The last known face. Every serial killer leaves something behind. Some leave trophies. Some leave symbols. The Frankford Slasher. He left witnesses, and they were ignored. Long after the case was closed, the pain remained, not just for the families of the victims, but for the women who survived. They had seen him. They had spoken to him. And yet, no one listened. Witness 1. The bartender. Her name was Marlene. She worked the night shift at a neighborhood dive bar off Frankford Avenue in 1989. She remembered the man clearly, not because he did anything obvious, but because he watched her. He'd sit at the far end of the bar, nursing a ginger ale, always alone, never drank, just sat there, watching. One night, he followed her when she walked out back to smoke. He said just one sentence: "You shouldn't be out here alone." She never saw him again, until 1990, when she opened the paper and saw the sketch tied to the slasher investigation. Her knees buckled. It was him. She reported it. No one followed up. Witness 2. The neighbor. A woman named Diane lived in the same building as Margaret Vaughn, who was murdered in 1988. She remembered a man who had come by the week before Margaret's death, claiming to be from a local charity. He asked questions. Do you live alone? Do your neighbors have family nearby? What time does the mail come? She found it strange. So did Margaret, but no one thought to report it. After the murder, Diane gave a description to police. The man she described: balding, mid-40s, white, polite, matched the exact physical build of George Feeney. Still, no suspect was named, and no sketch was released to the public. The face in the footage. In 2005, a documentary crew revisiting cold cases in Philadelphia unearthed a box of raw footage from the original news reports on the Frankford Slasher. Inside that footage, crowd shots, crime scene coverage, interviews with locals. But one clip, barely 2 seconds long, showed something no one had noticed before. A man standing behind the yellow tape at the scene of Jean Durkin's murder in 1987. Expressionless, heavy-set, balding, white, watching the camera without blinking. He wasn't a cop. He wasn't a reporter. He wasn't a neighbor. He had no reason to be there. No one could identify him. But when the footage was slowed and compared to the composite sketch, it was an almost perfect match. The man in the footage had the same nose, the same jawline, the same dead stare. Could it have been George Feeney? The original detectives never commented. The documentary team turned it over to police. They never released a statement. The coldest truth. By 2020, more than 35 years had passed since Helen Patton's murder. 9 women, officially, were tied to the Frankford Slasher. Others were likely ignored, and the man many believe was the true killer. He was never arrested, never interviewed, never even publicly named. But his shadow still lingers. In old news footage, in barroom stories, in the memories of women who survived by instinct or luck. Detective Ron McLeod, now in his 70s, still has the case file. It sits in his study, next to a framed photo of Leonard Christopher. The caption reads, "The one they took instead." He's tried, again and again, to petition for a posthumous exoneration for Leonard. Each time, the motion is quietly denied, because to reopen the case is to admit the truth, that the justice system got it wrong, and that the real killer, the man with no past, no future, no face, walked away free. One more time, the silence that screams. In the end, it wasn't just the murders that haunted Frankford. It was the silence that followed. The silence of the justice system. The silence of the press. The silence of those who knew and looked the other way. The Frankford Slasher didn't just steal lives. He exposed something deeper. A rot at the heart of how we decide who matters and who doesn't. The forgotten women. 9 confirmed victims. All women. All white. Most over 40. All considered marginal by the world around them. Living alone. Battling addiction. Mental illness. Or poverty. They were overlooked in life. And they were nearly forgotten in death. Police reports often use the same words, no forced entry, possibly known to suspect. no known enemies. But beneath the clinical language was something raw, something no one wanted to name. These women were preyed upon because no one would come looking for them fast enough. And that's exactly what the killer knew. The convenient conviction. Leonard Christopher was convicted because he was available, unthreatening, and isolated. He couldn't afford a powerful lawyer. He didn't know how to navigate the media. He didn't fit the profile, but he did fit the system's need for resolution. And that's all that mattered. A black man, tried for the murder of a white woman, with no physical evidence, no DNA, no witness placing him at the scene. Still, convicted. Because justice isn't always blind. Sometimes, it sees exactly what it wants. The ghost of George Feeney. To this day, there is no record of George Feeney's death. No confirmed location. No public statement. No arrest. He is a name that drifts through whispers in Frankfurt bars. A shape spotted in old crowd photos. A face described but never apprehended. Some say he left the country. Some say he died anonymously, buried in a pauper's grave. Some believe he's still alive, older now, grayer, slower, but still watching. What if they're right? What if the slasher never stopped, only became more careful? What if the system's greatest failure wasn't that it couldn't catch him, but that it let him go? The detective's last word. Detective Ron McLeod gave one final interview before his health declined. He was asked if he believed the case would ever be reopened. He shook his head. They don't want to open it, because if they do, they'd have to admit what we all know, that we convicted the wrong man, and the real one played us all. He used the system like a mask. He paused, then added, and the worst part, he didn't need to run. He just waited until we looked away. A scar on the city. The Frankford Slasher case is now a cautionary tale of media pressure, of judicial shortcuts, of who gets to be believed and who doesn't. It remains one of the darkest chapters in Philadelphia's criminal history. But most people don't even know it happened. And maybe that's the final cruelty. Because the killer didn't just escape justice. He escaped memory, and that's how monsters survive. Not by hiding in darkness, but by learning how to blend into the light. Was justice ever served? Or did justice die with the ninth victim? Unseen, unclaimed, and unremembered. This was the story of the Frankford Slasher. And if you've made it this far, you're one of the few who still remembers.